I'll just get you to the next
Well,
page.
that's the title
Right
page.
now.
We can go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the origin of, uh, started using Popper's three worlds in the process of developing second order cybernetics. It was Heinz's invention back in the mid 60s, or was it? No, I guess the mid 70s. Yeah, mid 70s, 74, when he was trying to distinguish um, his conception of cybernetics and that of Warren McCulloch and Umberto Maturana from the engineering conception of cybernetics, which was dominant at MIT and Carnegie Mellon and so forth. So that second slide, next slide, just lists several definitions of what we mean by first and second order cybernetics. So for Heinz, observed systems was first order cybernetics, observing systems was second order cybernetics. For Pask, the purpose of the model was first order cybernetics. The purpose of the modeler was second order cybernetics. For Francisco Varela, controlled systems was first order cybernetics, and autonomous systems was second order cybernetics. And then I suggested two distinctions. Interaction among the variables in a system would be first order. Interaction between observer and observed would be second order. Theories of social systems would be first order. Theories of interaction between ideas and society would be second order. Okay, so I was meeting during this time in Vienna at the European meetings on cybernetics and systems research, that's EMCSR. And over one of the conversations, Francisco Varela told me that what I was calling second order cybernetics was not what was meant by second order cybernetics, and that I needed to study more biology. So I said, well, okay, that's fine. He's a biologist, I'm a social scientist, so I'll just invent social cybernetics. So next slide. Okay, so here you see three versions of cybernetics: engineering cybernetics, biological cybernetics, and social cybernetics. So engineering cybernetics was first order cybernetics. Biological cybernetics is what McCulloch and Maturana and von Forster were working on. And social cybernetics was what I was trying to develop. So you can read across that. I'm not sure if you want to listen to me read all that, but there's the view of epistemology. It's a realist view of epistemology. Knowledge is a picture reality. A biological view focuses on how the brain functions. And then a social cybernetics would be a pragmatic view. Knowledge is constructed to achieve human purposes. So it's very much purpose oriented. A key distinction is reality versus scientific theories, realism versus constructivism, or the biology of cognition versus the observer as a social participant. Then the puzzle to be solved is construct theories which explain observed phenomena, include the observer in the domain of science, or explain the relationship between the natural and the social sciences. And then what must be explained: how the world works, how an individual constructs a reality, how people create, maintain, and change social systems through language and ideas. And then a key assumption is that natural processes can be explained by scientific theories. Ideas about knowledge should be rooted in neurophysiology. And let me just make a remark about that. That was von Forster's criticism of Popper, that basically he said Popper's working in the world of philosophy. He doesn't understand neurophysiology. And that if he understood neurophysiology, he would have a different approach to philosophy. And then finally, over in social cybernetics, ideas are accepted if they serve the observer's purposes as a social participant. An important consequence is that scientific knowledge can be used to modify natural processes to benefit people. If people accept constructivism, they will be more tolerant. That is, that each individual constructs his or her own reality. And when you speak about reality, you're speaking about yourself. And then transforming conceptual systems through persuasion, not coercion, we can change society. So those are the 3 points of view as they were back in those days. And then once on a trip to Vienna, I was having dinner with Karl Mueller. And Karl had been reading Heinz von Forster's article, Computing in the Semantic Domain. And Heinz had described a triangle, but he had explained 2 sides of the triangle, not the third side of the triangle. I thought the 2 sides were realism and constructivism. He asked, what's the third side? And I said, pragmatism. It's an American philosophy. And Karl seemed to be quite surprised that I could answer this question so quickly when he hadn't figured it out. Okay, so here's my picture of a triangle, which is very similar to what Heinz was talking about in his article, Computing in the Semantic Domain. And then I just labeled it World Description Observer. I thought, well, that looks like Popper's 3 worlds to me. So there's a sort of overlap here in representations. And so I would say that side 1 is the old logical positivism, classical philosophy of science. What you're trying to do is create descriptions of the world. Constructivism is the second point of view. You're trying to understand the observer and how the observer creates descriptions of the world. And then the third, that's a sort of management point of view, is how does an observer act in the world? Now, the interesting thing is that each one of these points of view emphasizes 2 vertices of the triangle and explicitly neglects the third. So in the classical view of science, you're trying to create descriptions of the world and you exclude the observer quite explicitly. In the second constructivist point of view, you're really only interested in the observer and the descriptions. You don't need the world because you've already in the mind of the observer. And then in pragmatism, this is the way managers think. You want to know how to act in the world, and you're not interested in theories because that's just, highfalutin theory. So you just want to know how to act in the world. So it's really quite remarkable the extent to which you focus on 2 and neglect the third. But if you look at all 3 of them, then you have a more complete, more holistic point of view. And so that's what I thought we were trying to do with social science.
You have one more here? 3 epistemologies. Oh.
Oh, I've said that.
Okay. Last one, vertices. And
Yeah,
we have your contact information.
So I covered all that. So
okay.
And then once at a conference, I mentioned this triangle, and Peter Karl was in the audience, and he says, that's very interesting, Stuart, what you said there about the 3 epistemologies. So in a sense, I would claim this is a theory of epistemologies. That is, what's going on with these epistemologies? That you decide to choose 3 of the vertices and neglect the third in each case. But if you include all 3 epistemologies together, you have a more holistic point of view. There you can explain more about the world, etc. But I can't get the philosophers interested in it. So going on to other things.
Okay, we are all thinking, I think. I have a question for Lou.
Probably should leave your share
looks
screen.
like yeah,
You want to leave your share screen?
You want to share screen? Oh yeah.
I say you could leave your share screen. Yeah, that's
okay.
better. Easier for us to communicate.
Yeah. The question is, well, you said that we actually just have one word. So my question is, then do we still need to draw a distinction within our one word? I mean, Jamie's work and my work was trying to make more distinctions so that we can look at the interactions with these different containers and different layers,
Well,
and so to have more high resolution picture. But if we shrink everything back into one, then what's next?
well, that's not my point. What I'm saying is that you want to recognize the unity from which you come. And if you examine the second order point of view, which says that everything is said by an observer and everything is under the aegis of an observer, then you're back in a unity, but you're back in a unity that's out beyond ordinary logic. You're in the unity that language and meta-language are coincident. But if language and meta-language are actually coincident, and they must be in order to have an observer at all, a linguistic observer, a conversational observer, then you are you are inside the logical paradoxes that have been attempted to be avoided. You get them immediately as soon as the language and the meta-language are conflated. So therefore, we always proceed by saying, well, all right, we have to make certain distinctions. We're going to think of this system, and we're outside this system, and we're analyzing it, and then we get into all of the dialogue that goes on to keep away, to keep inside a logical working out. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you realize that you constructed it. And that you can deconstruct it if you wish. So the unity from which you work is that unity of language equals meta-language equals observer. But you want to exfoliate from that into the distinctions that are of use to you, and perhaps to as those distinctions that are of use to you and no more. How complicated do you want to be? How complicated do you need to be? So that's my point of view about that.
Yeah, but Stuart just mentioned that triangle thing, that different group of people can only have the capacity to focus on just the two point and maybe one connection between the 2 point, and they have to completely forget about the third one, and that is, I think, a very real phenomena, and we need to figure out how are we going to face that phenomenon.
So yeah,
Go ahead, Jamie.
I have a question for Stuart. So I'm very glad you decided to join the presentation, because I read your papers and I wasn't really sure where you were in the engineering versus the middle versus social cybernetics, because I wasn't really sharp in what you wrote there. Now the comment I have for you is that pragmatism, I mean, you really hurt my feelings there. I mean, and I shouldn't say hurt my feelings. What I'm trying to say is there is a philosophy that's called pragmatism that's so different from the managerial version of pragmatism, and that's very much impregnated by theory. And I thought you were going to say that, yes, I'm a pragmatist. I mean, like, so I think the reason, I mean, I mean, I don't know where you are with this project, but if you like frame it in the pragmatist, as a pragmatist philosophy, I think you're right on top of whatever is going on in the world in terms of making distinctions, key distinctions. So where did you get the idea to just kind of, they are pragmatism, that's what those managers do, and they don't care about theory, or
Well, pragmatism, as I understand it, is the American philosophy.
Yeah, but it's a
And
good one.
realism and constructivism, those are European philosophies. And pragmatism is a very nice philosophy. It's pragmatic. That's
No,
a good way.
there is the difference. This pragmatic is some application when you have semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic. But
Yeah.
pragmatist is the philosophy.
Yeah.
So pragmatism, the way I understand it, is that the question is, what does knowledge do? And so the realist is say, is knowledge true? But who cares whether it's true? It's about what does it do? And that's evolution, that's biological evolution. They say, I created this piece of knowledge now, what is it doing? Is it helping me or is it hurting me? And so pragmatism is constructivist because we are the ones creating the knowledge. So the outlier, I would say, is realism, because they kind of imply that there are people out there that don't believe in reality, or while it's actually it's a process. We need a process philosophy, and that's maybe where realism is not very helpful because it's always behind, so to say.
Okay, well, let me pick up on that you need a process philosophy, and I want to connect that to something Lowell said. When he says you need levels of thinking in social science, and we don't have enough levels of thinking in social science. And I want to agree with that very strongly, that I find, and I think the way I think is basically the way I've been taught to think by cybernetics, Heinz and others, is that you have three things going on at all times. You've got philosophy, theory, and practice. And the people in the business school where I supposedly hang out or did for a while have next to no understanding or interest in philosophy and little, if any, in theory. And what they're interested in is methods. So how do I construct a strategic plan? How do I hire the people that I want to hire? And these are very pragmatic questions. And anything more conceptual than that is not management, or it's not something that belongs in a business school. Fortunately, they never ran me out. But they made it clear they weren't interested in what I was talking about.
So,
Uh,
so that
the way this is related to this is that, you see, it used to be you'd have a philosophy of how do you do science, and then you'd do science, and then you'd apply it down the road. But what the cyberneticians did is they said, okay, your philosophy, your realist philosophy is based on assumptions that you're not paying attention to. And if you look at how the brain works, if you look at cognition, it refutes the assumptions you're making about the nature of knowledge. And that was the criticism that the cyberneticians were making to the philosophers. See, it used to be the philosophers criticized the scientists. Now the scientists criticize the philosophers. And the philosophers have never really got on board that point of view. So they just don't pay any attention to science. Karl Mueller said that the philosophers of science have stopped doing critiques of science, and they've gone off and done other things, and that cybernetics has picked up the agenda or the task of philosophy, which he interpreted philosophy of science as critiquing science and making suggestions to science and so forth, that the philosophers of science just stopped doing that. And if they would study the science of cognition and use it to reconsider their conception of knowledge, then they could get on board with cybernetics. But they don't want to do that. So it's up to cybernetics to continue the philosophy of science, according to Karl, and I think he's probably right. So that, to me, that's the notion of levels. You got to work on three levels. If you're not working on three levels, you don't have a complete conception of what's going on.
So if I may, I started in agricultural engineering, and then it was like biotechnology was en vogue. So I came to the United States to do a PhD in molecular genetics, like a corn transposable element at Purdue University. And then I had friends in strategic management, and they kind of totally disproved what you said. I mean, I don't know where that idea came, that in management, they're just like interested in methods and plans. No, what I discovered was that the strategic management, at least, that was applied philosophy. I mean, they were addressing all the questions that traditionally are addressed in philosophy. But now, what was the problem? Since there is no real philosophy of science, all those management researchers are like reinventing the wheel. I mean, they're starting from scratch, looking at very, very traditional philosophical problems. And it's like very difficult and painful because there is a lot of bad philosophy, but there is a very good intent. And a good intent is trying to understand how a complex system works. But so this in strategic management is from the perspective of one unit in a larger system of an economy. But it's not just about making money, it's about trying to understand how do you get from an idea, something that doesn't exist, to completely worked out product with the people making billions out of it. So like, what are all the little radars involved? So either way, while I was in strategic management, I came across the literature in cybernetics, and the one thing that I found particularly fascinating was the double bind literature. And that was a question I had for all of you. How are you using that idea particularly? Because for me, it was very helpful. Whenever I saw a paradox somewhere, I really started thinking, what is going on here? And that allowed me to kind of move forward in terms of finding a nice way of dealing with a paradox. And I discovered the name Bateson and double bind, but I didn't really find a further development. And actually, I ended up going into psychoanalysis, which I found out via a back door is connected via Jay Haley and all that stuff back to Bateson. So I'm just curious how this, the idea of a paradox is for all of you, including Lou, I guess.
Lowell, do you want to say something? You are expert on Basin.
I'm not an expert by any means, but double bind is a situation where a person is confronted with two irreconcilable demands, and both demands will not resolve the dilemma. And that's exactly where we are now. I mean, the 200-year events have happened twice last week. You know, we're looking at systemic collapse because we have gotten into these cul-de-sacs of thinking about science. I mean, it's fascinating to watch Fauci and Trump and others, but the age of the expert is really expiring right now. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because we're looking for collective intelligence, not within just an analytic science. So what's the escape pod from getting in the double bind of where we are today with the ideas floating around and our options? I mean, Von Forster had a wonderful thing that, he mentioned the fact that you want to end up with more degrees of freedom or more options at the end. And we are in a double bind situation where you have no options. You are redundant, repeating the same sort of paradigms, reinforcing the actions that reinforce the disasters we have. That's one way of looking at it.
Okay, so you haven't like a heuristic that you say if you deal with the double bind, these are like the 4 choices, and including, I mean, this thing called double loop learning. I mean, that it forces you to go at a much deeper level, examining assumptions at the systematic.
What you're looking at, I mean, you need to look at triple loop learning.
Yeah.
You're not just using the existing system and applying it like in management. You are not just looking at the tools that you're looking at. You're looking at the system from wherein you are locked or prisoner in my presentation.
Yeah, but that is a metaphor, and once you invoke that as a metaphor, there are all sorts of ways you can go. And actually, could you explain what you mean by prison?
A prison, okay. I was 12 years old. I was like young boys reading comic books. There was one comic book that was emblazoned in my mind. It was about a prison and prison riots and all the problems, etc., in a prison. And a guy in a white coat scientist comes in and says, I'm a psychologist. I know how to change your whole culture here. Prison warden says, okay, try it out. So they take their worst and nastiest killer and they hypnotize him and they take him through a journey where he's breaking out of prison in his mind. And he gets out and he's free. And he wakes up and sees the prison as wonderful lattice work around the windows, bars. You know, the ability to have power over the mind and think that you are not in a prison. That's what I'm sort of looking at. And that sort of image has driven me over all these years, that there are peoples and ways of knowing that imprison us and make us think we are free, but we're not.
We aren't. Okay.
Lou?
Does that explain it, hopefully?
That was helpful.
Jamie also asked Lou his opinion.
Lou, do you want to say something?
Well, we were talking about the kind of double binds that are occurring now, and they are all, it seems to me, of the kind that there's more than one group, and the groups are at loggerheads with one another because everyone in one group takes a certain point of view and a negative point of view of the other group, and that's the form of the double bind. But then how do you get out of that depends on the context of it. If it's being driven by powerful political forces that keep reinforcing that each group will take its own point of view, then you have to ask how you can affect those political forces. It is not a matter of logic or logical types. It is a matter of how you deal with the actual social situation of that kind of politicization.
In my research on the American Revolution, Madison, Jefferson, etc., all thought in triads. And so you have 3 branches of government, you have citizenship, corporations, government. They're all looking at, and as any basic engineering course will say in 101, you need 3 points to find the center. Mm-hmm. In a bipolar world, you will just get back and forth, and it's a matter of dominance. So if you looked at my chart of levels when, nature and zero learning, it's the gladiator pit. It is survival of the fittest, because it's all about power. At the higher levels, it's all about information, identity, and relationships. Mm-hmm. And that allow you to, and when the American thinkers were trying to get from a collapsing system to a frame of government, they said, oh, what we really need is to go that highest level of learning. So what's in the first line of the Declaration of Independence? What do they base all these strange principles upon? The laws of nature and the God of nature. Why? Because when the the British came over with their porcelain teacups, etc., the story to all the American children was the lost colony of Roanoke. You can have the best crisp English accent. You can be born through the right thighs, and you will die unless you see nature. So nature was our tutor over here for the American Revolution to look at evolutionary processes. So Washington could inoculate 40,000 people and win the war. You know, it was the ability to see what was there and then get your representation and challenge your cultural background. That's, you know, so what I'm talking about is a form of thinking at the higher levels, evolutionary levels, like evolutionary in nature, that deal with information, identity, and relationship. So let's take the simplest pneumonia virus. It has 3 forms of knowledge. It has identity, me and not me. It knows quanta, how many me's there are, because in pneumonia, it is the old man's blessing because it kills you quickly. How does it do that? It has something that is beyond my imagination. It's able to look at the landscape of the body and know when it's the weakest, and they will do their trumpet charge, and everyone comes to the lungs and kills the person. So those forms of knowledge about identity, relationship, quanta, and the model of the universe is done with something that doesn't have a brain, doesn't have a neurological system, but is able to interact and evolve, not within itself, its own knowledge, but evolve in its own nature. So it becomes a scorpion instead of bigger claws.
Can you say more about the identity? I mean, how could you put it as a triangle relationship with the information and the relationship? The identity is a totally imagined characteristics, or is something out there that, I mean, who defines that?
When you go from physics to chemistry, cybernetics has been based really on biology. It needs to be based on chemistry. And a gentleman named Jerry Chandler has been working 15 years. I've been working with him for 9, 10, on understanding the different culture of the symbolic world of chemistry, because you can't use mathematics the same way as you do in physics, astronomy, all that type of stuff up there of things, because each atom has an identity related to the atomic spine of electrons, you know, nucleus, etc. It's a configuration. So there's a atomic spine of the universe. Each one, so I have a Tinder dating service of 1 oxygen looking for 2 hydrogen. They meet and they transform into something that has none of the properties, identities of either, but in their relationship, they create water. So that ability to, but then unlike mathematics, I have one, then you get 2. But the 1 and 1 disappear. There's no identity to it. Remember, mathematics came out of geometry, where you're imposing upon the earth a pattern of interactions of relationships. So the flood Nile, and you have to get the farmer's plot back there, etc. Even with Boolean algebra, the idea of parameters. Those are impositions. So as an example, we have a problem with government surveillance. I was at General Poindexter's, or Admiral Poindexter's meeting on total information awareness, where they had to get every information, every telephone number, every person in the United States. That's based upon Boolean structures, where I have to know the universe in order to delimit and find the needle in the haystack. There are many other ways of finding out information apart that, but you're trapped in Boolean algebra, basically, in your computing in that world.
I have a question for Lou. when you brought up a modern Platonic world, dus in the Roger Penrose model, and that you said, I think, dus when you took Pop's three-world hypothesis and you kind of say, hey, I think this is the modern version of the Platonic world. When I read the three-world literature, I'm a Roman Catholic, so it immediately kind of made sense to me what Popper was saying, in that I recognize, yes, there are the creationists who believe in a heaven, the Platonic heaven where all the ideal types are, and we're just here stumbling on earth trying to figure out whether we're understanding the ideal type. And so if Roger Penrose is introducing that, that figure, is he not indirectly introducing some sort of creationist thinking? I don't know what to call it, but that is introducing a very stifling idea. And what we have today specifically is like we have 4 versions of creationism, just like whether you want to call it Christian or Muslim or Jewish or the Witnesses of Jehovah, but all people that kind of think there is a Platonic heaven, and they are having the truth, and so there's no need to listen to anyone else. So and let me also add the following: in science there's something called the anthropic principle, like that they say the reason it's working so well is because it was meant to be like this. And to me that sounds as another version of creationism. So what is your personal opinion?
Well, as I was saying, Penrose is a kind of traditional mathematical Platonist. And speaking to that for a moment, I can explain to you how one doesn't have to be a Platonist to be a mathematician. Because, for example, it's clear that we construct the game of chess, right? We constructed it. We decided on the rules. It went through an evolutionary process and became a stable game that many people play. But once the rules are set down and we've accepted it, then it has an independent existence. And all the possibilities that are within it come into existence. And they are in World 3. The game of chess is an entity in World 3. But it doesn't have to be in some abstract Platonic world where all the patterns and all the forms are. It is the consequence of our having constructed it. And so it goes for anything you care to examine, I believe. Being an agnostic or an atheist in regard to the Platonic world, that's my attitude. There may be other people who would feel strongly that you had to have a Platonic world, but as you say, it could become somebody's religion. The Platonic heaven of the Muslims might be different from the Platonic heaven of the biologists, might be different from the Platonic heaven of the mathematicians, and so on. And so there's that. Now, it looks like you wanted to respond to me before I went on to anthropic principle.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Now, anthropic principle is certainly an interesting idea. It might be that the physical laws of this universe just happen to have the right tuning so that we can come into being and observe it, so that this universe manages to observe itself. And another universe you could imagine doesn't observe itself, and doesn't actually advance. So the idea of the anthropic principle is that the whole is tuned in such a way that it has its properties of being. And it's an idea that comes from biology, in my opinion, because, you know, a biological organism is tuned to have its being, to have its life, and those parameters can be shifted, and it can die, and it isn't viable. So the question of viable parameters giving rise to a livingness is extended by people who like the anthropic principle to universes as a whole. It's something, certainly something to think about.
But is there not a danger that it just becomes like the scientific version of creationism? Because you start with an assumption that you have hit absolute truth, possibly, and therefore there is nothing left to say or explore. So that is precisely where Popper kind of made a contribution in. Now, I'm not saying he did it in a perfect way.
Well, I don't think it's at all like creationism, because after all, one is saying one doesn't really know the whole story about the laws of physics anyway, right? But
Yeah.
one lives in a certain kind of scientific belief that there are laws of physics, and that the universe, then this projection, this metaphor, is that the universe is something like a living being, and that within certain parameters about its laws and structure, it becomes a universe that has scientists in it that can observe it, that has that living quality of being an observed universe. And then you might then wonder, well, is it true? Are the laws somehow balancing each other in just the right way? Maybe it could be investigated. But cosmological questions about the structure of the whole universe are, of course, notoriously hard to investigate because we don't know enough.
But they are metaphysical research programs, and they're very much present. So it's like
there's something about the way people do that that makes you uncomfortable, it would seem.
Well, it's something that Jason brought up. I think it was about our relation with time, and I don't know how much it showed up in all of your presentations, but time, technically speaking, is one of those invisibles. I mean, because the thing that we have experience with is movement of a body that's taking space, that is moving. And then at some moment during the Enlightenment, an abstraction was made, that the distinction was made between time, space, and mass. But so if we just look at time, we use metaphors. Dus you had originally the circle, rhythmic times, and then you had the arrow of time, and then William James, the saddle. But there is a view that says what is actually going on is we always live in the present, and we remember the past with one part of our brain, and we imagine the future, and we create the future with another part. But so this gives us a very, very different picture of science. And so when I include time in the discussion, then empirical science is about testing here and now, today. So empirical science is not just about the senses, but it's also acknowledging what I know here and now. And then when I hear this story about the Big Bang and the laws of physics, to me that sounds like a religion, like the 16th century.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
But the matter of time. I mean, we always want to tell stories. Storytelling is the first thing in some sense, and storytelling always is involved with temporality.
Yeah.
You have to juxtapose things in space and time to tell a story. And the scientist wants to tell a story. The cosmologist wants to tell a story that reaches all the way back into the utterly distant past. And one has the feeling that surely it's becoming a fiction as a result of this attempt to extend it.
Yeah.
And then people get very they get very enamored of some point of view, like the Big Bang. Why the Big Bang? I don't no, why? It has to be one big bang. It could be oscillatory. Other people have had there have been periods when an oscillatory universe was the kind of cosmology that people were interested in.
So that the project of cybernetics, so to say, that Stuart alerted to, is then to bring together various questions that are not really being studied together. Because I think this issue of time is actually of fundamental importance. That everyone takes for granted, that everyone thinks about time in exactly the same way, but
Well, but not
I don't
everyone
think we do.
does.
No, but
Yeah.
we need, yeah, we need a place where people can ask the questions, and is that,
Well, that there
yeah,
indeed is the function of cybernetic talk.
our second order cybernetics.
Yeah.
Stuart wants to say something.
Yeah, these things like the double bind and so forth, my understanding is that that's sort of the artifact of set theory. And if you're operating on one plane, you can get yourself into some paradoxes and so forth. But the way human beings get out of that is that they just reconsider their purpose. And you ask, so what's most important? For example, one of the problems we're having in this country right now is who is the president working for? Is he working for himself or is he working for the country? According to the laws, he's working for the country, but I don't think Trump has gotten the message. And so people want to prosecute him and put him in jail because he's not working for the country. Okay, so the resolution is think on a larger scale. You know, what is our purpose here? And if you do that, you can always get out of the double bind pretty easily. Like, for example, there are these puzzles that are popular in classrooms now, ethical puzzles. Some of them have with throwing a person off a railroad track so that in order to save somebody down the road, okay? So then the question is, would you push somebody off the railroad track to stop the train, which is on the way to killing 10 people down here? And most people would say, well, I think I should do it, but I don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to overtly kill somebody else, you know. You might yell at them and say, watch out, you know, or something. So those paradoxes or problems, ethical problems, have to do with, you know, the larger good. You know, are you willing to, and every time you go to war, you're considering the larger good. Yeah, I'm going to sacrifice this division or that division or these people over here and those people over there. But, you know, our culture will survive. And that's the larger, more important thing. So it's a question of scale and et cetera.
Now, we have passed the 2 hour time mark. Now, my question is, do you have a feeling that we need to continue this every week? Or if not every week, every other week, or every month? So we can really continue this thing called the Macy meetings in the club of Remy. Do you want
I have
to do?
one suggestion. Go ahead, Jamie.
I just want to mention, Jason and I were talking about that when we started the meeting, that we discovered something. I mean, we wanted to talk more about that 3-world hypothesis and what we had been doing with it. So we were thinking of at least doing it one more time. I just wanted to let you know. Yeah.
So you're suggesting another session about the 3 worlds? Yeah.
But it's, I mean, I'm getting to know you. I'm getting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading your work. Yeah, actually, Stuart, I read many of your stuff. Yours, I'm starting to read. Lowell, I haven't found anything yet of yours. but I'm getting the hang of it. And Jason, he had this paper, but I also think this is a very big question we are dealing with here, so it may need to go slowly because, and
Sure.
also you guys have been doing this for a long time, so you are in for a marathon, so I'll just run at your speed. Or
If I could have a suggestion building on Jason's observation, we're having our mini Macy meetings. Macy meetings was based upon feedback, redundancy in neural pathways, McCullough, etc. What would be the new Macy meeting themes? How could we take our conundrums with Popper, our problems with Alfred North Whitehead and set theory and logical types? What are the themes that we need to be worrying on that would allow us to actually put together a proposal and shop it around for some money to take it beyond our just little cogitations and get it to a group that is really able to deal with the larger components of how do you create something that goes beyond the first order cybernetics into what we call second order cybernetics or third order, whatever you want to call it. But what are the themes that we need to noodle on? You know, out of each of our presentations, what would be the Macy meetings of the future be about?
Maybe about an alternative reality or alternative truth.
Well, they call it LSD.
I mean,
maybe,
it's
maybe you're,
something very urgent, right? It's something going on outside of our window and on the street. Maybe as a scientist or cyberneticians, maybe we can do some contribution to clarify. I mean, to help people to clarify their word 3.
so perhaps you're suggesting that the next small meeting should be on that theme of what is the theme?
Okay, what is the theme? What's the most important and urgent issues that we need to contribute our brains?
The issue is, what questions do we want to be answering? We've been giving some of our answers in our explorations that we've been doing, but it comes up to what queries would a Macy meeting of the present future be about?
I think there's an urgent thing is the distinction between opinion and propaganda. I had a little email
That's very
debate.
important.
I had a little email debate with Paul Pongaro recently because I was trying to show him some of my observations that I observed, and he simply put a label says those are all propaganda. So the question will become, how do we distinguish propaganda versus opinion? I mean, legitimate self-constructed opinion versus the propaganda. I mean, we received all kinds of news and fake news and lousy papers and all kinds of unbelievable or believable stuff. We have to swim in that kind of information stream every day. So it's very important that we become very clear and clarifying. I mean, in Lois' word, the prisoner of our blind spots. What's our chance to jump out of a little bit of that blind box?
I have a suggestion. Let me provide a little background. You all know Michael Lizak. He's the current president of the American Society for Cybernetics. He wrote a proposal to NSF, and it was basically about feedback on scientific papers. So if he wanted to, let's say you have somebody writes a scientific paper that people think is important, and then other people use the ideas in that paper. And then you go back and say, are the people who are using the ideas understanding the idea? In other words, you give the guy that, or the person who wrote the first paper the opportunity to talk about the people who interpreted it. It's very similar to what Alexander Riegler is doing with his Constructivist Foundations journal. Some of you know Constructivist Foundations. It's very good thing. So, well, basically, the people at NSF dismissed it out of hand and basically said, you don't have a background in philosophy, so we're not going to listen. We're not going to. It's highly unlikely you'll be able to write a proposal that will.
Well, so what point are you making?
The point that I'm making is, I think that the larger theme that we're encountering is that certainly in the United States, science is defined in the material domain. Science does not include the social sciences, etc. Now we're making progress on that. People are saying, yeah, we need to include the social sciences and so forth. But we keep stumbling over things that I don't think we should be stumbling over. And this, the problem that Mike is having with this proposal and NSF is part of it. Because, and I've had, I've encountered this. For example, the problem of self-reference is an old thing. People just immediately dismiss any notion that refers to self-reference because it gets you into paradox. You're not going to go anywhere, so just don't think about that at all.
Yeah, but I still say, what point are you making? Because what there's two, because you're running into a certain kind of double bind here, which is that everyone, and cyberneticians are not the only ones, run into the problem of it's difficult to get water out of a stone. And that's a separate problem. We might be able to find the appropriately high point of view by which we could get supported by everyone. That would be great, but I think we have to go beyond aiming at getting this NSF to support us in order to solve that problem.
Well, my hope would be that we could somehow get them to fund a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary inquiry into the nature of information and selection. Because in my view, the American academic community is too wedded to matter and energy relationships and is not investigating information and decision-making issues. Let me just give you one example. In the defense community, there has been for some time a lot of interest in the subject of narratives. Okay, narratives are stories. And obviously they underlie any effort at propaganda. They underlie any effort at mobilization of people on behalf of a particular project. So narratives are a practical issue. How do you describe what it is you want to do such that it will be appealing to people? That's what a political campaign is all about. And so it's just one of those issues. Alt news is one of those things. Why is it appealing to some people and not appealing to others? These are issues that are very much bedeviling us. And I don't think we have the tools to deal with them yet. So why not? It's a large category, but you could have little bits within it. But it's all, in a sense, a cybernetic society. If you had a cybernetic society, you would be able to deal with these things. And you would understand issues like double binds and paradoxes and self-reference and things like that, that many people have explicitly chosen not to study.
So, if I hear you correctly, at the moment, the sciences are all kind of a little bit isolated from one another, doing their thing, and they all call themselves experts. And then there is an implicit hierarchy and everyone has their own hierarchy, and then there's polite conversation. But maybe that's what you're trying to get at, to find a model where the sciences are really working together and listening to each other and trying to work out the inconsistencies between one another.
If I could give you a story. My son says, "Dad, why do you have all those wrinkles on your forehead?" And he says, "It must be because all those brick walls you keep on running into." My proposals to DARPA, time and again, talking about narrative, talking about a systems approach, different paradigms of science. I mean, it's like I'm talking to a New Guinea native, and I know, and I've just been dropped in from outer space. So I don't think it's what Stuart is talking about is we need to convert them. You know, that's our missionary Mormon zeal. We'll go knock on doors, and etc. But what the Macy meetings did was develop a theoretical framework about feedback, redundancy, systems that went from 45 to into the 50s. What happened in May 1959 in Chicago is the Office of Naval Research, 4 foundations got together, bringing about 200 of the best scientists, mainly from World War II, and said, we know how to defeat the Soviets. It's this thing called cybernetics and systems and technology, the embodiment. So what you had is the traditional thinking, intentions of the humans. We need to get into the gladiator pit of interactions. We have a technology capacity of information to be able to defeat them and get to the moon first, which we did. So all of a sudden, you get these memos going back before Margaret Mead, Bateson, and others, who were the social scientist types in the Macy meetings, that said, we are going to get these locomotive engines that go so fast, we will override the illumination of our understanding of what we're going. The bridge is out ahead, folks, but you can't see it. Because the cybernetics went to the Norbert Wiener robotics, guided missiles, drones, that type thing. So how do we get this social element that we've been talking about with Popper, being the observer, etc., to theoretically, so we need the theoretical foundations. I don't want to knock on any more doors of DARPA or NSF. You know, my knuckles are hard, you know, hard.
Yeah, you bled.
You know, maybe Stuart, you and I will learn after a while.
Probably not.
Probably.
Yeah, the history is repeating itself. Now we have an issue of how do we defeat Chinese Communist Party's unlimited warfare towards the whole civilization. Maybe we can do something to contribute to that.
Well, in the CIA, there used to be, besides the thugs, and which is now mainly thuggery, but they used to have people that understood culture. Mm-hmm. And one of the most interesting things was the subversive nature of jazz. When they started bringing jazz in and rock and roll into the behind the Iron Curtain, it wasn't an ordered universe of control. It was interaction, 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 as a improvisation would do. Yeah. And I mean, that was a subversive act, but they understood that it changed the epistemology. So how do we get that thinking of Mead and Bateson and others? Because they're not our idols. We need to go beyond them, like we're trying to go beyond Popper. But in order to do that, we need to know what questions and theories, and then we will get people around us to fund it. Just an idea.
So why don't we continue the discussion next week into exactly this business?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I second.
Do we want to
Stuart, how
sharpen the
about you?
questions? Are we
This is
sharpening
gonna be
questions?
Saturday at 10 a.m.
Yeah, same time. I have
Anyone
no.
else to join us?
Yeah, we can invite some others. Do you want little presentations in advance or?
Let's call this time a loose conference. Today is Jamie's conference. Next time, Lou should be the leading organizer. How about that, Lou?
I'm not sure what you're suggesting.
I'm suggesting you define the format, not always me. I'm just offering Zoom for the meeting room.
So I think you're suggesting that I write an email trying to say what we want to do.
Exactly, yes.
To this group, exactly this group.
Yes.
To this group, whoever you want
All
to.
right, all right. I will try to do that later today.
Great.
We'll add to it.
Okay, so everybody agreed?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
All
let's
right.
call it for today. Guess you guys are hungry for lunch now.
Thank you, Jason, for organizing this. Thank you.
Oh, you are
Yes,
all
right.
more than welcome. I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy that you come. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
all.
you for having me.
Thanks to Jamie for
All right.
bringing the
See you next week.
Well,
Thank you,
See you
June.
next week, same time.
yeah, take care.
Okay.